All right, thanks everyone. Okay, we've reached our last panel of the day. Thank you for sticking with us. I know it's been a long day, but it's been a long day full of very amazing presentations and interesting conversations, hopefully. So I'm excited to introduce our next panel. This is our Development, City Challenges, and Identity focused conversation. And this panel is going to be featuring Anusha Mathur from the University of Pennsylvania, Maggie Wang, who's representing the Yale program on climate change communication, Lauren Harpold from Washington University in St. Louis, Simeon Hardley from Southern Illinois University Carbondale, and Jermaine Ervin Jr. from Huston-Tillotson University. So with that said, Anusha, I'll hand it to you.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much. I'm super, super excited to be here today. And this past summer, because of the Pulitzer Center, I had the absolutely life-changing experience of working on a reporting project about Playa Vinao, Panama. And before I begin, I just want to begin by thanking some of the people who made it possible. Everyone at the Pulitzer Center has been absolutely instrumental, including Livy and Jazzy. Where's Jazzy? I don't know. And I especially want to thank Kem, who's been such a wonderful mentor to me. I care so much about this story, and sending over a first draft was really vulnerable for me, so I really appreciate the care and thoughtfulness that you've taken to help me with this entire project. And I also want to thank Peter. I'm not sure if he's here still, but hopefully he sees this video later. But working with Peter has been one of the greatest experiences for me. And I've never before had a mentor who's cared so deeply about me and my writing. And working so closely with him has made me a better writer, a better journalist, and a better storyteller. So thank you to everyone. Okay, now on to the actual presentation. I want to start by playing something for you guys.
We are now in the middle of this magical place, magical life.
Playa Vinao is something really special.
We come here because there is something magical that got us here. So I'm I hope we don't lose it.
So, they say every magic comes with a price.
That was the rough cut of the first 40 seconds of my podcast, and I'm in the process of editing together all of the episodes, so stay tuned because they'll be on the Pulitzer Center website soon. But as you kind of heard in this little clip, Playa Vinao is this small magical town on Panama's Pacific coast. And let me tell you, it's a journey to get there. This kind of illustrates how to get there from Panama City. It's like a 6-hour shuttle through thick jungle, past farmland, windy cliff sides. But eventually I arrived there, and the reason I tell you about this journey is because that's what makes this place so unique. This town is as rural as it gets, but once you get there, you see luxury homes on the mountaintop, beachfront villas, upscale shops, outdoor food plazas, party venues. In the past 5 years, this town has experienced a surge of development and foreign investment into real estate. And this has had a profound impact on the area's precious rainforest and the local Panamanian community, who is largely not, the community that's driving these changes. These are some photos of the development that's happening, on the cliff sides and right on the beach. And I think I might have been the first journalist ever to come into this town, because when I did, and when I told people that I was writing about this story, I got a lot of questions. And this brings me to one experience that I wrote about in my field note that I want to share with you all. It happened in my favorite restaurant in this town, the Humuseria. And as you might be able to tell by the name, It's a Middle Eastern Panamanian fusion restaurant, absolutely delicious. But when I was in the humuseria, someone came up and asked me, ¿Eres tú la chica que está trabajando en el proyecto sobre Playa Venao? This means, are you the girl who's working on the project about Playa Venao? So in a small town like Playa Venao, word travels fast, and by my third week, multiple people would come up to me in this restaurant, in other restaurants, like on the street, itching to talk about their experiences in this town. And at first, this was like really great because, as you all know, often when working on stories, it's hard to get people to talk. So the idea that people were coming up to me wanting to share their stories made me really excited, and I wanted to share those perspectives. And I have always considered my biggest strength as a journalist to be listening and building trust. So as I talked to these people, I interviewed them in both English and Spanish, and I found it easy to laugh, wander on tangents, and make interviewees forget about the microphone. But what I want to talk about today in this presentation is the other side of this, because over the course of 8 weeks in Panama, I talked to dozens of wonderful people. These are some of them, Gilad, Anjali, and Francisco. And I got to know them and many others, but I found it increasingly hard to let go of their individual stories in search of the bigger picture. Their stories were personal, tragic, and often riddled with hopelessness as they talked about environmental destruction, being priced out of their family homes, and changes to communities that they'd lived in for decades. And I knew that telling the story of this community that had never before received in-depth media coverage was important, but I couldn't help but think about what I wouldn't be able to include in my final article and podcast. To tell a cohesive story inevitably meant that certain perspectives, even entire people, would have to be left out. And this weighed on me because I had enough material to create documentaries about all of them. So how to tell each of their individual stories was something that was hard. So my biggest lesson this summer was figuring out how to fit all of these stories together. And I realized that making sense of Playa Venao meant putting each person's experience within the larger context, even if that meant only a few would end up being central figures in my piece. So Scott and his organization, Tortugas Playa Venao, or Save the Turtles Playa Venao, became a symbol of conservationists and community members fighting for environmental protection. Eco Venao, an ecotourism hotel, became a symbol for one way in which people in this town are imagining a future that combines tourism with environmental protection through reforestation and sustainable accommodations. I still believe that every person's experience is important, but when it comes to storytelling, building overarching narratives can be more meaningful than straight questions about tragedy and hardship. And that was how I ultimately was able to show that the people in Playa Venao who I came to know so well were worth listening to. So to wrap up my presentation, I'm going to leave you with one quote from Anjali, which will definitely be finding its way into a later episode of my podcast. She told me, "Playa Venao has a special renown around Panama. I just hope they try to preserve our area as they increase. Make it better and not take so much or make us a small city. Have you been to Cancun? I wouldn't want Playa Venao to be something like that."
Hi, everyone. My name is Maggie Wang. I'm a second-year law student at Yale, and my project is called Climate Change and the Future of Cities, A View from the Philippines. In particular, I focused on 2 cities, or I guess 1.5 cities. I spent most of my time in Metro Manila, which is the sort of center of gravity of the Philippines, but my project is specifically about this new city that the Philippine government is building. The city is called New Clark City. It's located about a 2-hour drive north of Metro Manila. It's on a parcel of land about 9,500 hectares, which is about 95 square kilometers, or about 36.5 square miles. That's like 1.5 times the size of Manhattan. This city is built on an old US military base called Clark Air Base. And after the US, which formerly colonized the Philippines, left the country in the early 90s, they turned over all their military bases to a Philippine government agency called the Bases Conversion and Development Authority, or BCDA. And BCDA is basically in charge of developing, in the government's view, these bases, or like turning them to what the government thinks will be productive uses. So for example, commercial complexes or special economic zones that will, in the government's hope, attract foreign investment. And New Clark City is especially interesting because it's envisioned as a smart, green, sustainable city that's kind of the future of urban life in the Philippines. So what exactly does that mean? Well, among other things, 60% of the city's land is meant to be green space, so only about 40% of the land will be built up. That's kind of the main selling point, but also the city is located in what's supposed to be a more climate resilient area of the country as compared to Metro Manila, which is extremely vulnerable to flooding, and now possibly also on the brink of a massive earthquake. So I got interested in this city and wrote this story for two main reasons. One is that new cities, or the drive to build new cities, is fundamentally human, and currently there are a large number of efforts of wide variety of shapes and sizes to build new cities around the world. So in addition to New Clark City, there are new capitals being built in Egypt and Indonesia, a floating city built off the coast of South Korea called Oceanics, which is built by a startup also called Oceanics. There are a number of new cities completing construction in China, one of which was made famous by the Western media, which dubbed it a, quote, ghost city. The most recent of these developments is a bunch of Silicon Valley entrepreneurs have bought up some land in the San Francisco Bay Area, and they're hoping to turn that into a new city after they get the necessary permits, maybe in like the next 10 years or so. And the second, that's the first reason I wrote this story. New cities are a fundamentally human pursuit. And the second reason is that the Philippines is one of the countries most vulnerable to climate change. It's an archipelago, and as pretty much everyone I interviewed mentioned, it's visited by about 20 typhoons every year, which are becoming increasingly severe due to climate change. And so this effort to build a sustainable, climate resilient, green, smart city just seemed really intriguing to me. And my project asked three questions. One is the city viable? Two is, to what extent does the city live up to or embody the values of climate equity and climate justice? And three, to what extent does the city actually make a difference in the problems it's seeking to address? So New Clark City has been widely criticized for not being, especially by some like more liberal or progressive Filipinos, for not being as viable, or especially not being as sustainable as it's claimed, and also not really living up to the values of climate equity and climate justice. And in my reporting, I found some of that to be true. So among other things, the 60% green space includes a massive golf course. And as some of you may know, golf courses are not really that environmentally friendly. Additionally, the city is not actually going to be powered fully by renewables. Part of this is because the region doesn't have sufficient renewable infrastructure yet, but the target currently is around 30% renewables. And I think that leaves something to be desired if the city is to be called sustainable and green and low emissions. And also one of the more recent developments in the kind of political discourse around the city, which I found especially fascinating, is so some of the existing premises include the photo on the right, which you see is a giant sports stadium. This was built and used for the 2019 Southeast Asian Games, which are hosted in the Philippines, and the government's hoping to use this as kind of like a jumping off point for building the rest of the city. But recently, the Philippine Commission on Audit, which is the government's independent auditing agency, found that the stadium is essentially like a huge money drain. I think it's costing around 11 billion Philippine pesos per year, which I think is around gosh, I can't do math in my head, around 500 million per year, I think, in USD. So it's essentially a sort of bleeding money, and the government, because of this, the project has been criticized widely as essentially a white elephant, which basically means it's this flashy, expensive thing that actually now has become extremely costly and burdensome to maintain. So I think that some of those things were true, but what I most want to point out here is that actually, the thing that kind of most struck me in my reporting is not necessarily that the city might not be viable or might not actually be that sustainable or might not achieve the ends of climate or embody the values of climate justice or climate equity, but rather it kind of this city, or the pursuit of this city, reveals this giant gap between what politicians and developers aspire to and what the Philippine people hope for and wish for in their own development and in their own urban futures. So as an example of that, I have these two pictures on this slide. So the photo on the right is Makati, which is the I would say most affluent area of Metro Manila. It's a commercial area. A lot of like foreigners and expats live there. As you can see, it looks quite nice. And that's kind of what New Clark City, that's what you might envision New Clark City to look like, although perhaps with more green space when it's complete. And the photo on the left is an informal settlement, also in Metro Manila. It's along a floodway called the Mangahan Floodway, and as its name suggests, essentially it's meant to fill up with water whenever there's a typhoon or whenever there are heavy monsoon rains. And one of the issues around this floodway is that a lot of informal settlers, so like people who've sometimes like migrated to Metro Manila in search of work but don't have like stable formal housing, will like build their own houses along the side of the floodway, which has potential to exacerbate flooding and also to expose them to a lot of hazards. And because their housing isn't formal, there are generally just a lot of like safety concerns. So for example, a few months before I visited, there was a giant fire that destroyed the houses of around 28 families. So I think what these two photos demonstrate is that there is like such a massive and persistent inequality, and also just like massive misunderstanding in terms of the government, which kind of goes off to chase these visions of new cities and the needs of the people who are providing the labor and the resources to keep the Philippine economy going. And I think that this takeaway should both maybe lead us to be a bit skeptical of city projects that are just driven, like New Clark City, that are mostly driven kind of from the top down, and also lead us to ask ourselves, what can we do, or in what ways can we better envision cities that actually serve the people who keep them going. And I think this is really important because like cities are, I think despite these inequalities, these inequalities shouldn't stop us from, dreaming about the future of cities and what it might be like to have more like environmentally sustainable, like smart and renewable cities. But at the same time, I think we need to ask ourselves whose interests are really being served by these by visions like the one that's driving New Clark City. I think the ultimate takeaway from this is cities are sites of power and power inequality, and that has consequences both promising and perilous for our future as a world community, and especially when it comes to climate change and climate change mitigation and adaptation. It's really important to understand how this kind of power is used and misused in places like the Philippines. And there's quite a lot of slides I didn't get to, but I'm very happy to talk more about any of this during the Q&A. So thank you very much.
Hi, everyone. My name is Lauren, and I'm a student at WashU in St. Louis. And this summer, I reported on gentrification happening in both Amsterdam and St. Louis. So your first question for me, based off of that statement, is what does Amsterdam have to do at all with St. Louis? And to answer that question, I'll begin with a story. So in the fall of 2022, I met Tara Dakota Stein at an event in Berlin called Take Back the City: Perspectives on Citizen Activism and Politics. And at this event, there were 5 panelists, each speaking on activism in their city and the struggles and successes that they had faced. So after the event, I went up to Stein and introduced myself to her, and we began talking about organizing in cities that were either different or had a lot of different people, or just divided by either race or class. And her kind of tagline throughout all of this was that we really need to take up physical space with our activism. And that, okay, I don't know what's happening there. But that really resonated with me because I live in a city with lots of space, primarily in the form of vacant properties. So if this were showing the full thing, there would be a street right here called Delmar Boulevard, which divides St. Louis in half. North of Delmar is majority black, majority low income, and it also has the majority of vacant properties in St. Louis because of disinvestment, white flight, and decades of redlining. And in the area highlighted in the red circle, the city has tried to use TIFs and tax abatements to kind of attract development back into the city, but that has led to a lot of increase in rents and decrease in the affordable housing stock. And they also had this plan to kind of have this spill over into North City areas, and that really hasn't happened. So at the end of our conversation, Tara told me, hey, you know, if you're ever in Amsterdam, I'd love to show you around, love to show you more about our organization that I run there. And so about 8 months later, through the Pulitzer Center, I took her up on her offer. And I found myself in Amsterdam, and I really was walking around all of Amsterdam. I got to know the city pretty well because I was walking about 8 miles a day. But I focused primarily on 2 different neighborhoods, Jordaan and Noord, and both of which are experiencing changes due to gentrification and displacement. And I want to also specify that Noord is primarily immigrant and more working class neighborhood in Amsterdam. And so this is here a picture of Jordaan, and Jordaan has, in the 80s, was more working class and had a lot of vacant properties. And currently it's that, you know, area of Amsterdam where you go and you take the picture of the bike and you go vintage shopping and do that kind of thing. And so it's led to a lot of social housing, which is kind of the majority housing stock of Amsterdam, being sold to Airbnbs and developers and things like that. And it's really displaced a lot of longtime residents. And one longtime resident and activist that I spoke with a lot, Ina Poppy, told me, to be honest, I think we're completely lost already, but you have to do something. And so over in Amsterdam Noord, Tara Dakota Stein is really trying to do something, trying to get ahead of what has already happened in Jordaan. And so her activism through her organization really focuses on real estate acquisition as a form of activism and as a form of taking back space for the community that's already there. So pictured is a picture of one building called De Ritwijker, which was actually owned by the city, and her organization successfully lobbied to take over that vacant property and turn it into a space for the community. And so currently, members of the Amsterdam Noord community can come into this space freely and access Wi-Fi, restrooms, the kitchen, and even like kind of culture and art events that they put on through this space. So I think that brings us back to my initial question, or probably your initial question of, you know, what does Amsterdam have to do with St. Louis? And while there are, you know, some small similarities of like post-industrialism and things like that, I really think it's more of a question of what does any city have to do with any other city? Because in reality, gentrification and displacement, it assumes many different forms just depending on the history of the city, the people that are there, but it universally subjects housing and neighborhoods to commodification. And I think when we think about gentrification, we typically think of like one group of people coming into a space and displacing another group. And while that is true, it typically starts due to policy that is already occurring in that area that's been, you know, made by the government officials, the leaders in that area. And I want to highlight what Sam Nemeth, another citizen activist who was actually Ina Poppy's partner, told me, it's policy making. It's the only thing we have as citizens. Thank you all for listening.
Hello, everybody. My name is Simeon Hardley, and I attend Southern Illinois University, Carbondale. So I'm going to be doing a story. I I have a few names for it. I'm still working on the title. This right here says Hoop Dreams in America's Fastest Dwindling City. But on the website, it says the impact of high school sports has on a dwindling city. I'm trying to find a title that will capture people's attention and do justice to the story that I'm telling. So I'm reporting in a small town in Illinois called Cairo. I haven't already left. I haven't started reporting. My start date is on November 13th. I'll be following the high school basketball team players, the athletes, and then my end date is going to be around June 5th to their graduation date. I want it to be a medium to long story, about a semester long. It is a photojournalism story, so I want to capture moments of them throughout the school year or the remaining school year and do them justice to the story. So the purpose of my reporting is to document the student athletes and what they go through throughout the school year and explore the role that basketball has on them and the community as a whole. The reason I chose this city is because within the city there are major struggles that the people face, as well as the teenagers and the kids as well, and I want to capture the raw essence of what Cairo is and some of the challenges that they face as a city. So with me documenting the students, this was actually last year's graduation class. It's a very small area. The population for Cairo is around 1,500 people. It's a predominantly black area, and it's a very small class. It's only a junior and senior high school. And it has high violence rate, and it's a low income environment. So I feel like it's important for me to tell the story on the children and on the community as well. And also, I don't want this to be a basketball story, but I want to use basketball as a way to tell a greater story and about community. And the reason I chose basketball as a sport is because they have a rich history of basketball success despite them coming from a small environment in Illinois. They have a lot of talent that's come out of that town, and I want to dive more into the culture and see the big role that it has on the players in their future and what they learn from it. Now, as far as the community story goes, Cairo faces a lot of financial and environmental obstacles in that community. It's high poverty rate. It has really bad housing maintenance, and the population is quickly declining. Reasons due to this is because they also have a HUD crisis, and HUD is housing development, or in something like that. I'm not totally sure, but it has to do with the housing development in that area. So pretty much to explain it a little bit better is that it's a small environment, and a lot of it, they have high rises and apartments, and that's government owned. And due to that, and due to the city bringing in a low income, it's high poverty, and has a high violence rate, a lot of the political and state and government entities want to kind of drive people out of that city. They feel like it's pretty much a ghost town. They feel like nobody should be living there anymore. Just let the city go. So it's pretty much a battle between the people that live there currently that are fighting to stay there and are asking the government for resources to help grow and develop the city that used to be booming in success. And then you have the people and the government. There's like, we don't want to invest money on it because it's not going to go anywhere. It's not going to help develop because it's already a lost cause. And they currently only have one grocery store, and they just opened earlier this year. So for them to get groceries and essentials, they would have to drive outside of the city to a neighboring city just so they can get groceries, stuff like lettuce, fruit, vegetables, and stuff like that. I did think I had a little bit more, but maybe not. So that's pretty much what my story is. I haven't reported on it yet, and I feel like I will be dealing with a couple conflicts because I want to use the student athletes. I want to develop relationships with the students, and I want to eventually narrow it down to a couple of students that will be comfortable with me to go inside their homes, meet their family, meet their parents, and get the parents' perspective on where the community is and how they deal with struggles. And there was a documentary that I watched when I was doing some pre-reporting. And it was by Vice, because they've already been down there. I'm not the first journalist to report on this area. And in that documentary, it was a documentary video, and it really showed the housing and the situations they live in. A lot of the housing developments and apartments aren't clean. They aren't up to date. They're roach infested, a lot of rats and mice, and just, it's not a place where a lot of people should live. And there's a lot of people that are struggling financially, so I want to be able to capture that, but also show the beauty that the people have in the city and why they want to develop the city. This used to be a booming city, just to give you guys some background. It used to be about 15,000 people in it about 60 plus years ago. But due to racial tension, it was a lot of white flight, a lot of financial resources left that city, and that increased poverty rate, and that increased violence. So pretty much, to wrap it up as best as I can, I want to take this city, I want to report on it, and I want to show the beauty of it, while also being a unbiased, or as unbiased as I possibly can, journalist, to show the current state, show what the residents in that community are hoping for the future, and how basketball is a sport that the children use as an outlet to see better and more than what they've been given. So I hope that came out pretty nice. I hope I didn't break it up or stutter too much. I appreciate you guys' time, and I appreciate the Pulitzer Center for allowing us, everybody, and all the reporters the opportunity to report on stories like this. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Jermaine. Let me set this up really fast. Cool. So my name is Jermaine Ervin Jr. My project that I did was Black Education Amongst U.S. Borders. I really want to give a shout out to the Pulitzer Center for allowing me to be able to do this. I am a little nervous right now, so we're going to see how this goes. All right, so just to give you a little background about myself, I go to Huston-Tillotson. It is a historically black college in Austin, Texas. I am also from Austin, Texas. I'm a member of the African American Male Teachers Initiative, so I am an education major. I concentrate in technical applications. A reasoning on why I wanted to do this study of black education beyond U.S. borders was because coming to a HBCU, I was actually a transfer student, and going through historically black college curriculum, you take courses that go into depth of African American heritage. And with that being said, I took an African American course, African American literature, and it brought me really close to my African American heritage and another side of myself that I never necessarily highlighted or decided to focus into, and it really made me curious on what black education looks like outside of the United States and outside of my community, and that was the motive behind wanting to go outside of the United States. And with that being said, I did go to London. I did not mention that yet, but okay, so I made this presentation in like a chronological order, excuse me. So this was the first interviewee that I ran into and that I had the pleasure of speaking with. His name was Alua Akurel. I still have a hard time of pronouncing it, but on his hat it said Big Low, and so we called him Big Low throughout the interview, and it was a pleasure. Kind of give you insight on this picture. We were in Battersea Park, and I was casually scrolling with my sister, just looking, being American and just looking for someone to talk to. Being in the UK really highlighted a version that I never really noticed of like kind of just minding your business and being out there and trying to interview people and speak to someone and kind of getting the cold shoulder and like people just reading books and really just minding their business was kind of hard. But Lo was He was a black father from the looks of it. He had two sons that were riding around, and I forgot to mention their names, and I don't know them off the top of my head, but they were both around the same age. I think they were 1 year apart. They're the two brothers that are in the picture. And he was just sitting there on the bench, and his two sons were just riding up and down, up and down. And at first, I walked by, and I was like, man, I really want to like talk to him. But I haven't interviewed anyone at this point. It's probably like my first, maybe like a couple of days in. I hadn't interviewed anyone because I was still waiting on the main person I wanted to talk to get back to me. But I ended up walking back, and I was like, you know what, I'm just going to talk to him. And we sat down, and we had a conversation for about 30 minutes. And I got into just asking him how it is being a black father, and insights on education with his sons, and necessarily what he looks forward to and what he wants for his children. More information on him himself. He's 41 years old, and he is an attorney. He grew up in London. He has Nigerian heritage, and he spent primarily most of his life in London. And I did get a chance of asking him 3 questions that I did want to share with you all, because his response, it really sat with me. And the first question I asked him was, when I asked him about the education system and the black influence within it, his response was, when there are black educators, they tend to be sports teachers. It would be great to have more academic black educators. And that is something that I've seen throughout my life as well. Most of the teachers are usually coaches and things in that aspect. And we got a little bit more into depth, and I asked him disadvantages of lacking black educators. And he said the disadvantages are that it perpetuates the idea that success for black people comes through entertainment or physical activity. For children, their teachers sit at the apex of wisdom. They appear to be the most learned. The institution of school holds such respect. Often children tell their parents that until their teachers declares things to be true, it is not true. If this authority is only white, then it is deeply problematic. Black children will always feel the authority exists outside of themselves, and it can skew their ideas of what is possible for themselves. And that set really well. It set with me a lot, because the lack of black educators really goes into hand whenever you're not able to kind of project yourself onto the teacher. I'm gonna go ahead and go on though. So this is Lavinia Stenat. She is a 26-year-old writer, author, and she's also the founder of the CEO of the Black Curriculum. This was primarily who I got pleasure of speaking with. I'm going to get more into the Black Curriculum. It is a social enterprise focused on addressing the lack of Black British history in the national curriculum. They work outside of schools, and they work throughout school districts as well. And basically they highlight history that's not necessarily distributed throughout their school systems. And they focus on things like the Windrush generation, slavery, abolishments, and things in that aspect. With that also being said, I was able to attend an event with the Black Curriculum and the Hackney Picture House, and they did a premiere of the Blue Story, and basically I was able to sit in and we watched Blue Story, and I don't know if anyone's seen Top Boy, but it's on Netflix, and it has the same cast and crew, and it's a London-based film, and it's a crew of predominantly Black British actors. And it was an amazing moment, because we sat there and we had a Q&A after the story, but I was able to visually see what it's like to be Black and to live in London and to go hand in hand with drug abuse, gang violence, and even how that trickles from being in school. And it even covered like young love, Black love, and kind of gang violence, and how turning ends is what they call kind of like where you're from, and just being based on that. This was my reflection. Well, these were the questions I was reflecting. What was surprising throughout this journey, and what moved me the most, most mainly, was Black perception. I feel like for me, experiencing this, it really altered my perception of what it meant to be Black, and how being Black is different in everyone's own eyes. And why this is important is because although a lot of times it's easy to kind of get caught up in the setting that you live day by day, this really opened my eyes to notice that things go on everywhere at all times, and really being in the time difference of being 6 hours ahead of what I was used to was pretty mind-boggling. But why you should care about this report, I would say it's because just like each and every one of us, we all come from different backgrounds, and although you might not be able to reflect or relate to what someone comes from, it still exists, and it's still something that makes the mind ponder and makes you appreciate things and appreciate life. So that was the main thing, and what I wanted to kind of close out on was just this little thing. So this is kind of something to reflect on. It's crazy to think that in a moment of time, through a setting of chaos, destiny relying on probability, the chances of what boat you ended up on would change the story for all your bloodline to come. A community separated like Pangea, installed with different languages and information, fighting for different nations under different circumstances, reflections of their homelands and traditions morphed into what is taught as right, left with the dawning thought of the ripple effect of probability, fighting the label of their skin, different trauma, same indifferences, different nations, same color of skin. We fight for the information of our ancestors, not because they owe it to us, but because with the slight difference in events and roulette wheel of possibilities, we could have been raised in a different pair of shoes, looking through a different lens, with the same emptiness to seek to indulge with knowledge. That's it.
Thanks again to all of our panelists. You've all done an amazing job. I want to start by asking if any of you have questions for one another. I'll make sure your microphone's on. Any questions for each other? All right, that's okay. Any questions from our audience then? Yeah, Michelle.
Hi everyone, I'm Michelle. I'm from Northwestern in Qatar. Firstly, great presentations. Everyone's topic was very interesting. But my question is for Jermaine. Why did you choose the UK and London for your topic?
Thank you. The reason why I chose the UK was primarily I wanted to go somewhere where I would still be able to speak English, and that was the main thing. But also, kind of like just reflecting on blackness and reflecting on something that was kind of unknown was like a feeling of whenever I would see like models and people that I follow like on Instagram and influencers that are from London or Paris, I would look at them and would have the same skin complexion or hair texture, but I never would feel like a similarity in image. Like I always felt different just from like, there's no way I could relate. And it kind of, it was mind-boggling thinking like we would both be considered black, but like just the indifference in image. So that's primarily why I chose London specifically.
Hi, my question's for Maggie. I know that you're that's okay. I know that you're with the Yale Law School, so I was just wondering what inspired you to work on like urban sustainability in Singapore through like the Pulitzer Fellowship.
Thank you for the question. I think, I guess just that these issues both really fascinate me and also like really matter to me. There are some legal elements here, like land rights issues, and also when I was mentioning the inequality between like what or the gap between like what communities in Manila want and what the government is building in New Clark City. This one example that I came across was like there's a community that wants to build an affordable housing complex, and they've been waiting for essentially like the go-ahead and funding for that for like almost a decade, and so there's like legal barriers around that. So it's kind of relevant to what I'm studying, but I also think just that like these kinds of issues like cities, like power inequalities and climate change, they're just like very relevant, and they're like very, they say a lot about how we understand ourselves and how we understand our place in the world, and how we like live with one another. And so I just like wanted to make something out of that.
I'm Hannah. Hannah Wilson Black from the University of Chicago. I have a question for Lauren. In Amsterdam, obviously part of gentrification on an individual level is, I mean, I know that some places are probably being rented out as Airbnbs, but to some extent, I imagine there may also be people who are just of higher income who have moved into the neighborhood and like live in the neighborhood. When you were talking to people who were sort of, I guess, I don't know if they would call themselves anti-gentrification activists, but when you were talking to the activists, was it important to them to attempt to involve the gentrifiers in their activism, or was it sort of an attitude of like, listen, at the end of the day, these people are not, the same things are not at stake for them, so we're not going to try to like pull them into our work because that's going to take way too much labor on our part and we have other things to focus on. I'm like curious about whether they whether they wanted to make an active effort to like almost reach out to the gentrifiers, or whether that seemed sort of like a distraction from their work.
Yeah, I think that's a good question. So to answer that, I'll focus on Jordan, because that was a neighborhood that was much more gentrified and kind of like past the point of return. And the activists that I spoke to there were kind of, their activism focused more on anti-mass tourism and anti like social housing companies selling to developers. So it was much more like at the policy level, and kind of going and, you know, directly addressing political leaders where they're, and then on the other side of that, they told me that, you know, really getting their community together and talking to the people that actually live there and kind of rallying them was one of their main goals and focuses of their activism. And through that, also having a really diverse base was really important to them.
Hey, Jonathan Custodio, former fellow. So I have like 3 questions. Can I like, is it better to do straight fire or like one at a time? Okay, so I'll start with you, Lauren. I was wondering what sort of how Airbnb and these rental companies were able to purchase the social housing buildings in the first place. Was there a particular loophole that they were taking advantage of, and kind of like how that was, why was there a failure to address that on the city's part? And then for Jermaine, did you come across any sort of HBCU networks similar that we have in the US in England? And has there been any sort of pushes to have anything like that? And just for you personally, someone who seems very invested in education, particularly in the Black community, how did you feel coming back to classes in the US and talking to some of your peers after that project? And then for Simeon, so when you, like, the history there, right, like it says like sort of a historically big basketball town, I'd be curious to hear more if you've considered like talking to some of the older folks who used to be on like basketball teams like back in the day, and kind of like how they have seen their communities progress and how like the influence of basketball and youth sports has been on their community. And like really delving into the fact there's only one grocery store in the town is kind of wild to me. And I really want to see further intersections. Just a little more background. I went to a high school that's like a big basketball school now. Definitely wasn't when I was going there. But it was also like, today it's a majority Black school, but I've talked to people who went to the school like 60 years ago and it wasn't anything like that. So I think that like some of the older generations would bring a really like powerful perspective to that. And I'm wondering like how you've thought about that.
Okay, so the question was, how are the Airbnbs able to purchase the social housing? So that kind of goes back into the history of Amsterdam a little bit. So for probably around 30 to 50 years, Amsterdam and the Netherlands in general were primarily run by the Labour Party. And then in the 90s, they started to, and during that time, that was when the social housing was built. And then in the 90s, the government started to liberalize more and neoliberalism kind of set in. And while in the the decades prior, the social housing was run by nonprofit organizations kind of in partnership with the government, they severed that tie in the 90s, and then the nonprofits were kind of left flailing a little bit because they no longer had this source of income. And so they had to look to, private investors, and kind of similar to what occurs here, to fund the housing that they were building.
And to answer your question, speaking about HBCUs, whenever I was out there, I spoke to a lot of different interviewees. Low, but he knew what a HBCU was. A couple other people didn't know. It was very informative whenever I was telling people. I was told that they don't have any organizations like that or school systems like that primarily. And kind of tying back to what you had asked about how it was coming back to my school and speaking with people about it in the classroom setting, I did speak to one of my primary classes where it's just education majors, and we were talking about it. And a lot of the kids that go to my school that I'm close with, they're from like Kenya and other areas as well, and they have like some Caribbean descent. And it brought us a lot closer in the sense of just being able to talk about a couple of things that they've kind of already known, and like slang of like wagwan, mandem, and things like that. So that was pretty cool. But it was also pretty influential in the sense that they wanted to expand their horizons and also figure out what some studies that they're interested in particularly looks like in different areas and different cultures.
And to answer your question, so I do hope that I can meet some of the former basketball players, especially that were on the basketball teams that had a lot of success. Now, I'm not sure how many people may still live there that is from that basketball history, because a lot of people do leave, whether it's something they want to do or whether it's something they have to do, because it is like a battle between the people that are owning the buildings and tearing them down and pretty much telling people that this place right here is a ghost town, you need to leave, there's nothing here, and then the people that want to stay. Like a major part of the people that stay in that city are the elderly people, because they are old, they're older, and they just can't get the finances to move a lot of times, or they can't take the physical toll on moving and starting over in another place. So that's a major population of the people that still live there. Maybe the people that are like 30, 40, 20 years, they probably do leave and go somewhere else that has more opportunities and it's better for their children. And as far as the youth population in basketball goes, since it is a small town, a lot of people know everybody. There is a program going on right now called Midnight Runs, and what they do is to make sure that the students and the youth don't get in a lot of trouble, they host these basketball runs in a gym, and they'll gather the children that play basketball, put them on a bus. They'll travel to a town called Carbondale, where I'm from, and then they have these basketball runs in the gym at midnight, just to make sure the kids, or around midnight, to make sure the kids stay off the streets and they have something to do to refrain them from getting into the things that are easily accessible due to that environment, and trying to promote positivity to those children. I hope that answered the question.
Hi, my name is Jesus Villalba from Westchester Community College. I have a question for Anusha about the project. I'm really interested in hearing the podcast series comes out. But if I understand correctly, and if not, please correct me. It sounded like it's a story about the overdevelopment happening in Playa Banao, and I did notice that there is a shift from not sort of detailing the impact of overdevelopment in a rural area and shifting focus into maybe the way that it's coming from the ground up, people wanting to do ecotourism as opposed to standard tourism. What's your sense on how that could play out? Is your sense from that attempt how it's going to play out in terms with, it sounds like overall tourism as an economic model sort of brings along some problems, I guess, I don't know.
Yeah, absolutely. That was something that I thought about a lot because when I initially proposed this project, I went in thinking that my story was going to be about, environmental exploitation and degradation. But then when I got there, I realized that it was much more complex than that because that was certainly happening. But then in terms of the impact on the community there, a lot of them were actually happy that their community was growing, that they had a supermarket, an ATM, like more jobs that weren't farming or fishing for like the first time in centuries. So I ended up like needing to delve, deeper into seeing what the future for this community looked like in a way that kind of merged growth and development that brings some positive things to this population while also kind of envisioning a future that does not destroy a really critical environment that exists at kind of the bridge of North and South America is like really key for a lot of species, plant species, animal species. So in terms of like where the future is going, I kind of in my story, in my written story at least, talk a lot about Eko-Vanau as a possible vision for the future where reforestation can be done in conjunction with sustainable accommodations to welcome tourists, but also give agency to local communities. And I kind of put that against, or like I kind of like talk about that vision, but then also talk about what the government is trying to do. They're really investing in rural communities throughout Panama, but they're kind of just beginning that process. So it remains to be seen like what will actually happen in these rural communities. So what I kind of come to by the end of my story is that like the future remains to be seen since this development is still in its very early stages, but there are examples like Eko-Vanau that can serve as a guide for how to do it sustainably going into the future.
Okay, good afternoon. My name is Christian Thomas. I'm a junior at Hampton University. And so I have a question for Anusha and Simeon. So first mine's for Anusha. So I was kind of wondering, since the community was small enough where word got around that you were in those communities reporting, did you ever get worried about like your interviewees kind of fixing their responses in a way? Did that kind of worry you? And then I guess for Simeon, just so I can get this out, for yours, I was kind of wondering about the size of that graduating class. Was the reason for that students dropping out, or was that because the community was so small that was just how many they had there? So.
I think that question is super interesting. I mean, the first time that someone came up to me, like I said, I was in that restaurant and I was scared. I was like, oh my God, how do you know who I am? Because a lot of my reporting was, digging into real estate development, like looking at whether a lot of it was done kind of shoddily and because this is like a rural town, the town was really not prepared to regulate it in the way that it was supposed to. So I was a little bit nervous at first that random people were coming up to me, but I noticed a trend in who was coming up to me, and it tended to be locals who were from the community, and people who felt like they didn't have a say in the future of the town. So their stories ended up being pretty they had a similar overarching theme, but I didn't worry about it being fixed because they really talked about their individual experiences, and I made sure to delve into their individual experiences to make sure that I was learning about each of their stories to fit it into the bigger picture. And I the town was literally the town is growing, but the downtown is still just one street. So it totally does make sense that people would talk to each other. And I think foreign journalists coming into this town is definitely the subject of curiosity in a small town in Panama.
And to answer your question, Christian, I believe it's a little bit of both. So the place I'm reporting to or from which is in Cairo. That's about 2 hours away from where I'm located at, and I grew up there in Carbondale, which is about 2 hours away from my reporting location. And as far as I can remember, since elementary school, we've always had a influx of students from Cairo coming to Carbondale because the families will move. And another reason I did not mention due to this is because flooding. The city is located in between two of the major rivers, and it's a flooding problem there. So when the rain season comes, it often floods and destroys a lot of resources. So I do believe that part of it is because students do drop out, and part of it is because it's just a small environment. It does have gang violence or somewhat a presence around it. I haven't been there, so I don't know 100%. I haven't reported on foot, but from what I know, it does have a violence. It may not be seen as the safest place, depending on where you go. So I'm assuming that it can be hard for young adults and teenagers to stay in school when school is really small. They might live with their grandmother, who may be older. They might not have a two-parent household, and they might deal with these struggles. So it may be easier for them to drop out and hang out with their friends rather than go to school when all their friends may not be doing that. And another reason is because it is so small, a lot of people do move from there because of the lack of resources that they have. Like, they just now got their first grocery store in I don't know how long. So good question. And I do plan on doing some data research and talking to the school board and seeing the graduation rate and dropout rate and all that stuff. So thanks for the question.
Hi, I'm Florence Middleton from UC Berkeley's Graduate School of Journalism. I had a question for Anusha. I was curious, you mentioned some people that you spoke with were excited about development and some were more concerned about environmental impacts. I was curious if you saw any trends between who thought one way or another. Like, I'm making an assumption where I could see folks who are more excited about the development or maybe work in industries that are maybe dying out and they need new jobs, or people who are more concerned about environment may be more affluent and less concerned about the jobs. I was curious what you saw in terms of trends.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that there's a few layers to this. Firstly, I think it's this one's a little bit more obvious, but the people who are involved in the conservation space obviously cared a lot about the environment. And for instance, Scott Crystal was one of the people who I interviewed, and he actually is an expat from Maine who moved to Panama. He moved about 10 years ago, so he moved before Panama experienced its huge surge in development. But like you kind of alluded to, he cares a lot about the environment in Panama because this is kind of his chosen place, and because he's financially more wealthy than a lot of the people in the area, he has the resources to be able to start a foundation that, protects turtles in the area. I will say a lot of the locals who were employed at Ecovanau, for instance, in the reforestation project, they cared a lot about the environment, and they were very passionate about their own vision. And Ecovanau was initially started with American foreign investment, but is now pretty much 100% owned and operated by locals. So that's an example of the local community being invested in protecting its environment. And then the people who were really frustrated about foreign-owned restaurants and shops were also often locals because they were underpaid, weren't ever the owners of these restaurants, because it was mostly foreign capital that was coming to establish it, and then they would do the grunt labor, and like I said, were underpaid for their work. But then the people who were supportive of the development were primarily people who worked in industries like farming and fishing. There used to be a lot of cattle ranches in the area, but Panama is super humid, super hot, so it's brutal to be farming in the middle of summer. So these people found working in a restaurant in the downtown strip where there's air conditioning a welcome respite from some of the more grueling physical labor. And then even people who worked in younger people who were working in the hostels and hotels, they liked that their community was becoming bigger than just a small town where you kind of know all of your neighbors and it's just a few families. I talked to one girl who used to come to the town for brunches and barbecues with her family, and she missed that, but she felt that her perspective had also been widened by meeting people from around the world. So it ended up being a complicated story and complicated to balance these two very different perspectives.
All right, well, I think we'll go ahead and wrap it up there and maybe clap one more time for our panelists.